shared just in the group, but one of the guys was like, keep your bag to 25 to 28 pounds. Like that's the max. Don't go over 30 for sure. So, and he was an Army Ranger, or I think it was an Army Ranger. I'm sorry. He was a Ranger. Anyways, I'm not sure which branch of the military the Rangers were. Much respect to the military, but I'm not that versed in it. But he shared, yeah, he and his wife built a kit, and they kept it. They had it, a lot of overweight, and then he brought it down to 25 pounds, like you were talking about, Scott. So that's the thing that I need to realize too, is like my bag should be around 25 pounds. I don't need to have some of the stuff I've got in it, or I need to have modules that I can add to it or take away from it that as needed, and have those things in different bags or different kits. And so that was one of the biggest takeaways I got from, listening, doing the podcast, listening to Shane and you, and to then just go through my own kit and realize, wait a minute, I need to update this like major.
Right. You're like, this isn't going to work the way it is.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for like gardening. We had Buna on, and then we had Sid, and both of those two brought so much value to me. Like just understanding how you can alter your current landscape to have food all over your yard. Like Buna was talking about having currants, all kinds of different currants all over her yard. And I'm like, what's a current?
Yeah.
What a current is. I'm
like in a river?
That's all I can think of.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but it's currants, currants, but it's like black currants, red currants. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we used to make jams and jellies with these as a kid with my grandma. We'd go hiking in the mountains of Idaho around, what lake is this? I can't remember the name of the lake. We'd go camping for a week, and we'd go collect currants. And she'd show us, like we would do wilderness foraging, and she'd teach us the right things to grab and the wrong things. Like, this is wrong. Let me show you why. But then we would make our own jellies and jams out of the currants that we'd collect. And now that Buna talked about that, I'm like, those memories are flashing back in my brain. I'm like, and so I'm like, okay, I need to get some currants. And I know where I'm going to plant them in my yard, and I'm going to redo some of my landscaping. And I'm like, I can do currants. Currants are great. We've got tons and tons of wheat, right? We've got butter stocked up. We've freeze-dried some butter. But I'm like, currant jellies, jams. Like, oh my gosh, like we need more stuff that we can make, and then right, preserve, and then we have it. And that's part of what we learned from Sid, Prepsteader on TikTok. She's awesome at preservation. Like watching her content, I'm like, I can do this. Like it gives me confidence. For the next steps. And then I go try it and practice it. So like this week, I'm focusing on the things I've learned from Buna. I'm planting my garden. I finally got the freeze over in our area, and I can finally plant, like my tomatoes can go outside. My cucumbers can go outside. Like everything that can go outside, I'm putting outside now. I'm putting it into the greenhouse. Today's going to be a busy day of putting everything I learned from Buna into practice.
Nice. Yeah, I did last week. After I mowed the lawn, I measured a section of my yard. I have a section that was when I bought the house, they had a sectioned off as a garden, and they had lines running in it. And I'm thinking to myself, do I want to build this as a garden, or do I want to put a greenhouse in this area, just a huge greenhouse? And I'm feeling more like building a huge greenhouse. That way I can have things growing throughout the year, even when it snows or other things, or when it's a little colder, I can still have that greenhouse going and creating some food for me. And learning how she composts. And by the way, if you want to know which episode, it was episode 174 that we talked about gardening and composting and edible landscape. And Buna is amazing. And we're definitely having her on again. And I'm probably going to she's in our Facebook group too, by the way, and she's contributing there. So again, another plug. But as I listened to her in the first time when we were doing the interview, of course we were in the middle of it, so I wasn't really paying attention. But when I was going back through and editing it and listening to it again, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take notes again. I literally stopped the editing and I was like, I need to write that down. I need to take some notes, because Buna shared some composting ideas and ways to create good soil and how to turn your yard into a usable land for growing things. And I was following, ever since learning about her, knowing her, I followed her Facebook page too, which is in the link on that episode. And you can go to its edible, it's Garden Inspire and Basil and Rose. And she put a picture. I went out to my front yard to get my salad for the day, and I'm like, what? That is
Yeah.
so cool.
And it's stuff like we talk about simplifying our preparedness, like making it easier. And what she's doing is she's made it so easy. Like she's created passive preps. I love that phrase. But basically stuff you don't have to do a whole lot to maintain.
Mhm.
The less you have to do to maintain it, the better. So like water catchment system would be a passive prep, right? Gravity fed water filtration, that's a passive prep. As
Yeah.
long as some things are plumbed in and piped to where you need it to go, you don't really have to do any work.
Mhm.
But in some cases you have to do some work, right? But the
Maintenance
less work you have to do, the better. And like having an edible landscape,
Brilliant.
permaculture. It's permaculture. It's always there. It's always growing. Every season it's supposed to like produce fruit. It's producing the fruit.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what she does. And she does it so well. And she called it stealth gardening.
I love that. That was
Isn't that
so cool.
You've got
Yes.
all this food that nobody knows is food. And they're
Yeah.
like, people walk on by, like, but if you put a raised bed in your front yard and have all
Everybody's
this
gonna
corn
know.
out there and all, like, people are gonna be like, yoink, thank you. Put all
Yeah.
your fruit trees in the front yard. Yoink, thank you. Like, if you live out in a just farther out than suburbs, right? Past the suburbs, then you can start doing that. But if you're in the
Yeah.
suburbs, like I remember having fruit trees in our front yard in the suburb growing up, and my neighbor was over there collecting apples all the time. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what are you doing, lady? She's like, well, they're gonna rot. And I'm like, they're not even ripe yet. Like, what are you doing? And she's like, runs off with apples. I'm like, if you come back in 2 weeks, you can have some, but don't
Yeah.
just come over and take them all without asking. And she was the funniest old lady. She was probably 60% senile at the time.
Oh,
And I
wow.
just laughed. She was just the sweetest thing. But she had like that, how some people when they get older they start stealing everything, and they all of a sudden they have got problems at like the Walmart. They're like, grandma got arrested for stealing again, and they never had a problem growing up. But like
Mhm.
when they hit that senile phase, you're just like, oh no, what's happening?
Yeah.
And that's what she was doing. And she's just,
Yeah.
my
You
dad
got to
would
get
just
one of
laugh.
those. You got to get a little GPS bracelet or something on grandma to make
Right?
sure she's safe.
Oh,
That's
she
funny
was so
stuff.
sweet though. But we had the tree in the front yard and people would grab fruit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the city should do that. Like, instead of putting all this grass everywhere, they should put orchards, and they
Right.
should put gardens, and they should allow people to use it. And I think that's a much better use of funds and money.
Well,
And for us as preparedness minded, we should be doing the same thing in our own yards, permaculture items that are going to be there year round to save us money and to save us time. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm learning from Buna. She's been doing this over 20 years. Like, I don't know anyone locally that's more of an expert than she is.
Absolutely.
And I freaking love it.
And the other cool thing is she's been doing it long enough. She's so connected. She's got a lot of great resources. And she just added a guy to our group that teaches survival and wilderness survival. And I'm like, yeah, thank you for adding that guy to our group, because he's going to be a fantastic resource. And maybe we'll have him on too soon. But just some really cool stuff. Before we jump to another thing, I wanted to just make sure that, sometimes people are like, well, I don't have a yard. What do I do? Well, maybe you can co-op with somebody else and go buy an acre together and have a yard together with somebody else, and you co-op together some land. I remember hearing about some people that didn't have a lot of yard, and so they actually went in together, like a little community. Several people went in and they bought an acre or half acre or whatever, just on the outside of town or just nearby, and they were able to then grow gardens and use that together as a co-op. And so it's been fruitful. And then you might say, well, how do I pay for that? Well, if you have too many crops, there's farmers markets you can go and sell some of your crops at. And then you get to know the community even more. You get to help other people with natural foods. You get to make a little bit of money to subsidize what you're doing. And it just is a huge benefit. So that's one thing that I was thinking about, because I remember Sid on the episode, she was saying that she didn't really have a very big yard in her apartment. So what should she do, or could she do? And there's definitely things, hydroponics. There's things that you can do, tomatoes, and you can grow certain things in like just a balcony little garden. But even if you have, a situation where you don't have that, you can co-op with other people and get some land and grow a garden on that size of a land. I thought that was a really good idea.
When I lived in Arizona, I actually saw a garden in a apartment that I thought it was brilliant. They basically took a kiddie pool, those little blue ones with like all the fish on the sides, or
yeah
cartoons on the side,
I can
and then
see
they
it.
put they put rocks, or not rock, like bricks on top of that. So they had the kiddie pool, and then they had bricks, and then on top of the bricks they had all these little potted plants. And I was like, that's so weird. I'm like, that's so weird. Well, then a few months later, I'm walking by again. I look up and I'm like, and it's a screened in like a deck area.
Uh-huh.
She was on the second level. I'm walking by and I see it. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a cornucopia of food. And when I talked to her, she had jalapenos, she had tomatoes, she had some cucumber, she had potatoes. And she's like, how often do I really sit out here? I don't. But she's like, it's big enough that I can put 2 of these out here. She's like, I just did 1 for now, but I get food. I get tons of food out of this.
That's
Like
so
potatoes,
cool.
you can do a 5-gallon bucket and do potatoes, drill out the bottom, throw 4 inches of dirt in there, or good manure and mix,
Mm-hmm.
throw 2 potatoes in there, and then cover them. And then as they grow, and as the green plant on the top is growing, you just keep burying it to just a little bit above the dirt, and it'll keep adding potatoes. And at the end of the season, you just dump it out, and you got all these potatoes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. And one potato, if it's a russet, could be your whole meal.
Yeah,
Like
for
just
sure.
add stuff to it and you're done. And so thinking about those types of solutions from an apartment's perspective, but also she talked about barter and trade.
Mm-hmm.
She would take stuff and go trade with somebody else. Like she
Sid
takes
did, right?
eggs. Yeah. She takes eggs and trades it for milk because she's got a friend that has plenty of milk
Yeah, that was awesome.
and needs tons of eggs. And so like with her little garden, when she was in the apartment, she would take garden stuff and go to the farmer's market and trade. And I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need money. You can trade.
Yep,
If you've got something that somebody else needs and they've got something you need, that's an easy win for everybody.
totally.
So I'm going to go back to doing that. Like I'm going to grow. I've got a bunch of tomato plants I'm putting in. I'm going to start trading tomatoes. I'm going to start trading, beans and peas and radishes and carrots, like everything that I've got. I'm going to, whatever I bring in, whatever I don't can, I'm going to trade.
Yeah.
And I want to get really good at jams and jellies like my grandma was. Like listening to Sid on canning and pressure canning and rebel canning.
I
Like
love that.
that's the coolest term. It's water
Yeah.
bath canning, but it's basically what they learned during the Depression.
Yeah.
Like, guys, come on, follow us. Get on. Like, we'll introduce you to Sid. We'll introduce you to Buna. Like, we've got some amazing resources,
Yeah.
and they're in the group.
Become stealth gardeners and rebel canners with us. Woo-hoo.
Right.
Like I'm excited because I'm going to edit the episode we just did with Sid, because it's not as of this recording, it'll be out. It'll be episode 175. But as of right now, it's not out yet, but I'm excited to go through and listen to it again, because she has some bombs of wisdom and just amazing things that she shared about what she's doing to kind of preserve the food she's growing. And it was neat because I think she lives out of town and on a farm, and her whole front yard, or half of her front yard, is just a garden. And then she's got her whole backyard for chickens and goats. And what was the other? Rabbits. That's right. She has chickens, goats, and rabbits. And I was just like, you know what? I want to get some chickens, because she's like, if you're going to start with something, start with chickens. And I've been wanting to get a chicken coop for a while and start with chickens. And I'm going to have my wife, actually, I told my wife, I said, you need to listen to the last 2 episodes we did, because we're doing it, and we need to do it. And this is some great information to help get started. So I was super excited to listen to Sid and see her situation. I have no clue. Like literally one of the questions I asked her was like, so wait a minute, canning are metal cans. Like what are you doing? And she's like, no, it's jars. I'm like, jars are glass. Wouldn't that be glassing? Like what? I was confused.
Glassing is actually a term they used to use for spying on people far away. That's what glassing was. So seeing something far away.
So if you do canning, they will be glassing you. So that's basically the idea. They'll be spying on you.
I don't know about that, but like
anyways,
it was. So there's
it's jarring. I would say jarring would be a better way to say it, but
it's called canning because the lid is a metal lid.
Got it.
And you screw it on and pressure seal it, and you're canning or compressing and connecting everything so it creates a secure fit. But I used to do it a ton as a kid, and then as I moved into like a single guy life and wanting to date and find someone to marry, like when was I going to can? Like I was working full time, I was going to school full time, I was dating too much, spending way too much money on all those. But it's crazy because you lose those skills, they're not hard to get back going. You just got to make it part of your life. And
Yeah.